We are pioneers. We come from a long line of pioneers. We should be grateful for the hard work, sacrifice, family values, and faith that brought our ancestors to America and to Oklahoma and passed that heritage on to our children. My granddad, Edward John Burke, moved from Iowa to Oklahoma Territory when he was 17, first to the Cherokee Outlet, then to Greer County, then homesteaded 160 acres near Snyder in the Kiowa Comanche Apache Nation. He was 29 and working for the Indian Agency in Anadarko when Oklahoma became a state. 2 years later, he married Evelyn Rosalie Castell, who had come from Washington, D.C., where she was working in government service. Eva, as she was called, was born down the street from the Capitol at 10 7th Street. We have this picture of Eva's great-grandmother, Mary Boswell Stewart, and of her fourth great-uncle, Thomas Jefferson, the third President of the United States, known for writing the Declaration of Independence and for defending states' rights. In 1803, he took a great step of faith and purchased New Orleans from the French, and along with it, the land that would become Iowa and Oklahoma. Thomas Jefferson provided the land that the Burkes of Ireland would eventually homestead. The Burkes lived in County Galway for 500 years. It was commonly known as Burke Country. Mom's great-grandfather, William Burke, was born near Tuam and died in Lamarse, Iowa. Galway is a beautiful port city on the Atlantic Ocean, surrounded by mountains. Tuam is a small town 50 miles from Galway. We think that William's father, Michael, was born in Tuam on High Street. Mom's great-grandmother came from a successful family in Southern Ireland. Her grandfather was a professor in Dublin. We think her grandmother was a cousin of the famous liberator Daniel O'Connell. Her father was a sea captain who probably died in Charleston, South Carolina. Ireland as a whole was the most depressed country in Europe. Under British rule, it was illegal for Catholics to own land, vote, or attend school. Most Irish farmed less than 15 acres. America meant the opportunity to own land, to worship freely, and to get a good education. William's cousins, Henry and David, left Ireland 11 years before the Great Potato Famine. William and others left shortly after. Ships filled with Canadian logs destined for England returned to St. John, New Brunswick, loaded with Irish immigrants. St. John was the first city incorporated in Canada. William worked in London for a time, probably to pay for his passage, since America and not England was the land of opportunity. News of lead mining near Galena probably filled the streets of London and Boston. The lead rush preceded the gold rush by 20 years. The problem was that it took 24 days and lots of money to get to Galena by sailboat from Boston. Henry and David may have taken the Cumberland Trail, which was the first federal road project. It's more likely they paid to travel the Erie Canal to the Great Lakes and took a ship to Chicago. Later, many Irish immigrants would not be so fortunate and would remain in ghettos on the East Coast for lack of money to travel west. William probably followed Henry and David to Boston and then to the lead mines of Galena, but he took a different route, sailing to the port city of New Orleans and then up the Mississippi River. In 1830, the Sac and Fox Indians, who originally owned the lead mines, were moved west of the Mississippi. The Indian Removal Act led to the infamous Trail of Tears and formed Indian Territory, where men like Jesse Chisholm blazed trails in the wilderness. Mary settled in Galena, William in Dubuque. Galena was laid out in 1826, 4 years before Chicago. Dubuque became a town in 1833, 4 years before Chicago. William and Mary were married in Dubuque in 1836. William probably used the money he made mining to purchase several lots in the business district of Dubuque, which were later subdivided. He had a general store on Locust and Jones Streets, where an Irish pub is now located. After 10 years in Dubuque, William and Mary followed cousins Henry and David to an Irish farm community they established as Gary Owen. 8 of their 11 children were born in a log cabin on a 200-acre farm where they lived for 38 years. When farmland opened in western Iowa in 1876 and most of the family moved west, son Patrick kept the farm and replaced the log cabin with this frame house in 1903. Michael Burke lives on the farm handed down from cousins Henry and David, which has been in the Burke family for over 100 years. Around 1882, William and Mary and 8 of the 11 log cabin kids moved 300 miles west to Lamarche, Iowa to homestead new land. My great-grandfather Edward was 27. His oldest son, Edward John, my grandfather, was only 3 and grew up in Lamarche. In those days, Lamarche was one of the fastest growing cities and a popular vacation spot alongside New York City, Chicago, and St. Louis. The Burkes were very close with other Irish families. Helena married Patrick Flynn, while Edward and Mike married Delahunt sisters. The Delahunt farm near Lamarche was still in the family at the time of the 1956 Burke-Delahunt reunion. When my grandfather was 16, he and May earned business degrees from Western Union College. Out of the 11 children raised in Gary Owen, 2 became nuns, 2 died early, 2 remained single, and 4 moved 500 miles south to warmer weather in Oklahoma to find farmland for their 21 children, 16 of which were double cousins. After looking in Mississippi, Mike and Ed homesteaded in the Cherokee Outlet a year after the land rush. Helena and Patrick bought 11 farms in Greer County in 1901, and Granddad took part in the Great Lottery. 9 miles from Perry, Mike bought 320 acres, Ed and Lizzie each bought 160 acres, and Rick bought 80 acres of unplowed farmland. After 8 years, Ed moved to Granite, but Michael stayed and continued to farm and live in his 9-room house on top of a hill and be a part of the community. Oldest daughter May was the first woman to work in the courthouse. When Oklahoma became a state, Michael Burke ran for state insurance commissioner, but was defeated because he was a Prohibition Republican in a Democratic state. Julia and Clara each taught at the famous Rose Hill 1-room schoolhouse a mile and a half from the farm. It is on display at the Perry Museum. Julia taught from 1899 to 1900. Clara taught from 1906 to 1907. After working the Perry farm for 5 years, Granddad, Edward John Burke, attended Oklahoma Territorial A&M before he'd even had electricity. From Lawton, he applied for the Great Land Lottery, which was drawn at El Reno. Ed, Frank Burke, and Hugh Lafferty homesteaded adjoining lots near Snyder. Snyder was founded at the time of the lottery and was destroyed by a tornado in 1905, which was the same year that great-granddad died on the Granite farm, leaving great-grandmother Catherine with 3 children at home. Granddad got a job with the Indian Agency where he would work for 16 years, Catherine and the children lived with him for 3 years until he moved to Muskogee, then with May in Stillwater for 11 years. Catherine put Bess and Bill through OSU and Clara through UCO. Colonel Bill was one of the 4 founding members of Sigma Chi, the first fraternity at OSU. His name appears on the original insignia. Clara's name appears in the first directory of Central State Teachers College. As graduating in 1920 and living at 1109 Carson in Tulsa. At the same time, Catherine homesteaded 160 acres near Texoma in Texas County, Oklahoma, near her daughter Mary. Granddad worked in Muskogee during his last 13 years at the Indian Agency. Muskogee was the most important city in Indian Territory. Under Charles Haskell, the first governor of Oklahoma, Muskogee grew to be a great business center and almost became the center of the state of Sequoia. Granddad worked for the Indian Agency in Muskogee when it had an important role in history. Jack and Bob were born in Muskogee. Jack married Mary Ann Shoemaker and worked as a petroleum engineer. They had 3 children, John, Julianne, and Donna Marie, who live in Connecticut, Florida, and Colorado. Bob married Katie Coburg and had 2 children. Mike, who is married to Dee and has children Bobby and Emily. Kay is married to William Burroughs and has her cute dogs. Oklahoma's second industry after agriculture became petroleum. Granddad moved to Bartlesville, where Mom was born. He worked in the land department of the Phillips Petroleum Company until later settling in Tulsa. When Eva passed away, Granddad moved with his 3 kids next to Aunt Julia and Hugh Lafferty on Quincy. That house was later taken for the interstate. Later he moved in with Catherine, Clara, and Bess on Carson. The Carson house was taken for an electrical substation. Of course, the Trenton house is still there near Swan Lake. That's where Ray Lafferty wrote his award-winning short stories and novels. So we want to say thank you to my pioneering ancestors such as my grandfather, and happy birthday to my mother on her 90th birthday. We love you very much.